Hi, I'm Justin Naylor, Managing Director of iTOO Special Risks. We are launching a new series called iTuesday, and we look forward to chatting to you every Tuesday at 10 o'clock with a short podcast with something interesting to share. So today's topic is never let a good crisis go to waste. And I want to start this topic by showing you a number of different companies that are coming up on your screen. And I want to ask you the question, what do all of these companies have in common? Well, the thing that they have in common is that they were all born during a recession. And this means that they were all born under some serious financial stress. And I believe it was this period that made these companies even stronger and is part of the reason for their success today. One of my favorite people in history is Winston Churchill. And he had a famous quote that said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I believe that it is in times like crisis, like this, that companies and leaders really need to step up to the plate. I think the best example that we have in South Africa right now is our very own president, President Cyril Ramaphosa. And most of you will agree that in the past few months, Ramaphosa has been criticized for being indecisive and not taking action that South Africa really needs. But at the time of this corona crisis, Ramaphosa has really stepped up to the plate. He's made bold decisions, he's included everyone, and he's acted like a true leader. And I believe that these actions that he's taken are going to unite South Africa even more strongly for a long time after this crisis. I think the thing about a crisis is it really is an opportunity to challenge your status quo when it's at its weakest. So what is your status quo? Your status quo is really the day-to-day ways and the day-to-day normal of how you go about business. And during a time of a crisis, it becomes ineffective or it's at its weakest. I want to show you another group of companies, and these are coming up on the screen as we speak. And the thing about these companies, you'll agree that they're all also, like the first group of companies, world-leading companies and leaders in their respective fields around the world. And now these companies are perhaps even more relevant to a business like iTOO, because iTOO was born just 3 years ago, and we were born in pretty good times. We've had really good growth and good profits, and we're really proud of what we achieved. But just like these companies, we haven't been born in a crisis. So how are these companies relevant to us right now? So what do these companies have in common? Well, let me show you. These companies weren't born in a crisis, but they all grew in a crisis. They all used a crisis to rethink how they operated, rethink and challenge their status quo, and they ended up after the crisis as much stronger and better companies. Let's take an example like Starbucks. And I'm sure all of you and wherever you are in the world have had a Starbucks coffee. And Starbucks' business model was fairly simple. And they started out with a really big ambition. They basically said that in any major city around the world, they wanted a Starbucks on every single corner. And they started this out with lots of energy and enthusiasm, and Starbucks grew into a really big and successful company. But then something happened, the 2008 financial crisis. And that challenged everything about their business. They realized that they had too many stores and too many people. Unfortunately, they had to close their stores and they laid off 12,000 staff. And this was a really difficult time where they were battling just to survive as a company. But during this time, they did two things that I think fundamentally changed their business forever. The first thing that they did was introduce free Wi-Fi into all of their stores. And their thinking at the time was pretty simple. They thought that while consumers are under financial stress or pressure, they would give them free Wi-Fi so that consumers could come in and save on their data costs, and this may encourage them to come in and buy a cup of coffee. But I think this free Wi-Fi went a lot further than that. If you go into your favorite coffee shop anywhere in the world today, you probably won't be going to a coffee shop that doesn't have Wi-Fi. And if you look around you as you go into this coffee shop, you will probably see business people having meetings, techies working on their MacBook and doing creative things, and you'll see people just sitting and engaging and working on the free Wi-Fi. And I think these days the coffee culture has become so much more than just going to get a cup of coffee. And that was all because of the introduction of free Wi-Fi. The next thing that Starbucks did is they introduced loyalty cards. Now this may seem like quite an obvious one, but Starbucks were the first mover and the first company to get this right. And the thinking was really the same. They knew that consumers were under financial pressure and they wanted them to come back and buy in their stores. So they introduced a program where they said every 9 coffees that their customers bought, they would get 1 for free. And the customers thought this was a great opportunity because they were getting more bang for their buck in a tough time. And again, like the Wi-Fi, loyalty cards have become something that is almost the norm in coffee shops around the world, and certainly was something that has been carried on very successfully by Starbucks. Then I want to give you the example of a different company, and this is the Ford Motor Company. Now, the Ford Motor Company is one of the big 3 American car manufacturers, a very well-known brand around the world. And if you look at any classic American movie, you will notice one thing. All the cool guys, all the heroes in the movie, they drive these big, heavy American pickup trucks. Big, expensive, big engines, big wheels, big cars. Everything was big about the American motor culture. But then something happened in the financial crisis of 2008 as well. And what happened was 2 things. First of all, like the example of Starbucks, consumers were under a lot of financial pressure. But there was a double whammy this time for Ford and for the motor companies, and that was the oil price went up at the same time. And this meant that the price of gasoline, or gas as they call it in America, went from $2 a gallon up to $4 a gallon. And consumers could just not afford the fuel to drive these big expensive cars. So what did Ford do? In a time when fuel and price really mattered, they launched a new range of fuel-efficient vehicles. These vehicles were much more effective to run on gasoline, and they were well built so that they were cheaper to service and they didn't need to be serviced as often. And guess what? Ford was the only one of the big 3 American motor companies not to go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and they're still around today as a very strong and successful company. Just to show you a further example of these 2 companies, they've been collaborating again in the build-up to this coronavirus crisis that the world is facing. And they're thinking a bit like this. Can you imagine if you were driving in your Ford and you wanted to get a cup of coffee, but you were a bit reluctant to go into a coffee shop in a crowd of people? So what they've done, they've partnered with another company, Amazon. And the thinking is that you could be driving in your Ford, you could connect via your Bluetooth, you could dial in via Amazon Alexa, and you could order your coffee. By the time you got to the coffee shop, your coffee would be there and waiting, and you could get it and have it in your car. Think about the possibilities, how this could once again change the coffee culture of the entire world. And I think this is an amazing example of using a crisis to really change the status quo of a business. I'm a bit too young to know the songs and the music of Billy Ocean, but the words of one of his most favorite songs are something that I definitely agree with, and I'm sure you'll know this line. It says, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I think this is a really great example for us as South Africans. Because as South Africans, we tend to complain and moan about a lot. But when it does get tough, we really do pull together as a resilient nation. I think probably the best example we have is at the end of apartheid, just before 1994. And I remember the time when I was young then, and just like we're going through today, people were emptying the shelves of the shops because we were stockpiling. People were thinking of immigrating, and it was a very uncertain and tough time. But of course, we know the story, and Nelson Mandela took over as president, and the next 8 years was probably one of the best times in the history of South Africa, where we really pulled together as a nation, and we reinvented our status quo as a country. So, I think what part of our status quo does this weaken when we're going through a crisis like this? And I'd really like all of you to think about your day-to-day work that you've been going through and how that's changed since the 4th of March when we had our first corona case in South Africa. And if you look at a company like us at iTOO, a lot has changed. So suddenly we don't have to spend so much time in traffic driving to work. We spend a lot less time in sort of senseless meetings going through the day of work. And we're finding different ways to connect with our customers, just like this very video that you're watching. We can no longer do business face to face, but we're finding great and innovative ways to carry on with business as usual. So I'd like to challenge all of you today to say, while the status quo is down, we have a golden opportunity to give it a good kick. And I really believe that if we end up through this crisis going back to work as normal, I think that we've missed an absolutely golden opportunity. I really like this quote from Robert iTOO, and he says that the struggle you're in today is developing the strength that you need tomorrow. And again, I challenge all of you to think about the challenges that you're facing and how does this lead to your business becoming stronger and more innovative in the future. To give you a very simple example from iTOO, we've been launching a weekly challenge to keep engaged with our staff during the lockdown. And this week, our challenge has been getting our staff to dress up for all of their video conferences. And we've asked them to dress up as expert on top and fun on the bottom. And the message around this is quite simple. The message around this is that no matter what happens at iTOO, you can count on us being experts in every way, in the way that we apply our underwriting philosophies and in the way that we deliver expert service to our policyholders and brokers. But at the same time, we've really challenged our team to have a little bit of fun, dress differently on the bottom. And the message behind this part is we have an opportunity to do things differently. So have some fun and be creative, and let's reinvent the way that we're working. And I think that we are really doing that so far. To end off, I'd like to use the analogy of Enzo Ferrari. And here he really believed that Ferrari didn't actually sell motor cars. He believed that Ferrari sold a dream. And if you take this analogy back into insurance, in a business like iTOO, we don't believe that we sell insurance policies. We believe that we give our clients freedom and security to follow their dreams by looking after their special risks. And if you think about this, that's how I'd like to end off and say, this will never change at iTOO, but I really hope that we'll find many different ways of doing this through this crisis. Thank you very much.